All right, everyone, welcome back to Course of Action. My guest today really doesn't need an introduction. He is a USA Today and Amazon #1 best-selling author of over 70 novels, 125 short stories, and 50 read by author audiobooks. He's the editor of Thrill Ride magazine, which we're going to get into, and his Miranda Chase books have been described as Tom Clancy fans open to a strong female lead will clamor for more. So welcome, M.L. Bookman. Did I say that right?
Buchman.
Buchman. M.L.
Pronounce it.
Buchman.
Pronounce it like a K.
Okay, M.L. Buchman. How are you doing, sir?
Doing great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course, man. So we got a lot to talk about.
Cool.
I really want to know. 70 novels is a lot, so we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about how you narrated 50 stories. We're going to talk about that. And we're going to talk about some of the wild stuff you've done in your lifetime, including jumping out of airplanes. So, which is, it's always interesting to talk to someone who jumped out of a perfectly good airplane. You want to know the thought process behind that and say, what were you thinking?
I just thought it was something I'd never done, and it looked interesting. So I only did it a couple times,
Sure.
civilian thing, but it was tandem shoot. So I had a guide on the back, and we just went up 10,000 feet over Seattle, Washington, and jumped out of a perfectly good airplane, which was a little weird because I used to fly small airplanes.
So it kind of goes against everything that you were.
It goes
taught.
against, right. And he said, okay, he was really used to people being nervous. He said, okay, we're going to count to 3, and then we're just going to roll forward out the door. And he said, 1, 2. Apparently I never got to 3. I was out the door, and just great ride. So I had to do it a second time.
Wow.
And,
well, my wife wants to do it. I don't know if I could ever work up the courage to actually do it, but my wife wants to do that and bungee jump, and she wants to do some of the thrilling stuff, and I just don't know. I'm afraid of heights a little bit, so
that would make it tough.
I'm comfortable flying now. I can look out the side of the window of the airplane when I'm flying, and it kind of interests me the way you can look down upon the world and kind of look at it. I've gotten comfortable with that. I just don't know if I could get comfortable with going up knowing I'm going to jump out.
Yeah. My dream as a kid was to fly the big airliners.
Okay.
And so I was trying to get my ticket. And after about 100 hours, the FAA discovered that I was partially red-green colorblind.
Oh,
so
he said nope.
I'd never get to fly commercial. I might have gotten to fly cargo. And it was just like, that wasn't the dream. And so I hung up the ticket. And then years later, somebody said, hey, let's go jump out of a plane. So I did.
Why not?
Yeah. Well.
Okay.
But it's been a very cool reference to have for all these different weird things I've done. A lot of them have been research for the books. I wasn't a writer yet by that point, but I've sure used that experience several times.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah, that's anytime you get experiences like that, especially when you're writing, adventure books, military thriller type of books, that does certainly play a role in it for sure. And with you having written over 70 books, which is
it's not quite
up writing one.
that is the hardest one. My first book took me 4 years. My second one took me 6 months, and my third one took me 9 years because I was stupid. So I started 30 years ago. So the first book is really hard because you're thinking about craft and character and how do I build a good sentence, and should I put a paragraph break here, and should I? And now when I sit down to write, all I'm thinking about is character and story. The rest of it is programmed into my hands.
Yeah, you got your style down.
I've got my style down, and it's like, oh, I want a breath here. I don't even have to think. I'm going to hit the enter key. It just happens. And the reason I was stupid on the third book was I decided this was my magnum opus. Book number 3, trust me, will never be your magnum opus. And I went in and I revised it and revised it. I did 9 complete drafts of a 200,000 word book. I wrote over 1 million words on one book and
Wow.
managed to cut all the voice out of it. So it's my single worst selling book ever.
Really? Number
And
3 was
yeah,
your worst selling book ever.
ever by far,
Really?
nothing even close.
Wow.
And when I finally put it aside and started on book 4, that I learned so much more writing that book fresh than I did rewriting an old book 9 times. So every author has one of those stories where they got trapped by a story and they wound on it. Find yourself doing that, throw it away, burn it, do anything to get it out of your hands.
Mm. And kind of get a fresh start from it. So what about the other 67 books? How did those
Well,
go?
what happened then was I started doing a couple books indie, and then I sold to traditional. My breakout book was The Night Is Mine, uh, about the Night Stalkers, the military secret helicopter unit,
Yeah.
and they were romance novels. They were military romance about the woman who was so good they couldn't keep them out because it was back in the days when they didn't allow military female combat pilots. And that series just took off. So suddenly I was contracted for 4 books a year, and I started writing shorter books to put in between them that I was publishing indie. And that's what really carried my career. That's where I made the money.
Mm.
So I was getting audience from the traditional house, but they keep 88 to 92% of the money. And then I was getting the rest of it from launching these indie books. And it just steamrollered until 10, 11 years ago. I got spit out by corporate America yet again, but it was at the bottom of the housing recession.
Mm.
And they weren't hiring back middle managers. And my wife said, okay, here's your chance. Go. And so I wrote like my life depended on it. And suddenly I was writing 6 or 7 books a year because I already had these story arcs built in my head.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Some
just
of
had
them
to
I'd
get them
been,
out.
yeah, some of them I'd been working on for 4, 5, 6 years, or I had the first 3 books, or I had and so it's how fast could I type is what it really came down to.
Sure.
And edit and throw out and have books fail. And um, there are times where you just throw out a book and you go, okay, let me try again. Um, but that,
So you
you
said
know,
67 books a year?
no, 6 to 7, yes,
Yeah.
yeah,
Wow.
that was kind of my peak. But the
That's a
crazy
lot of
thing is,
words.
it's a lot of words, but it's a little weird if you do the math. If you, I type about 50 words a minute. I write under 1,000 words an hour. That means for every hour of 1,000 words, I'm staring off into space for at least 45 minutes thinking about it. I'm actually only typing for about 15.
Mm. Okay. Yep.
So what tips the balance is how much time do you put in the chair? So if I sit in the chair for 1,000 hours, I'm going to have typed 1 million words. 1 million words is 12 80,000 word novels, which I've never hit in a year. But the math, the math just, if you write every day, if you write a couple hours every day, even if you're only writing 500 words an hour or 250, by the end of a year, 250 words a day is a page a day. You've got a 365-page novel at the end of the year.
So that's what I try to do. I try to write every day, even if it's just a couple
Yes.
hundred words, or even if I just go into Scrivener and I add some thoughts to the notes in a chapter, just to get it out of my brain and onto something else, because my brain will fail me, and I
Right.
won't remember it, and something to be key. My phone is full of notes.
Mm-hmm.
I count that as writing for me personally, just because it's the expression of it. It's the work put behind the expression of it. So I try to make sure I do something like that every day if I don't sit down in front of the laptop and hammer away something.
Yeah. Yeah. It's it's a skill, and the more you practice the skill, the easier it gets. It never gets easy. It
Sure.
gets easier.
Yeah. I'm sure once you learn, and I think I'm getting to that point now where I'm starting to learn the style in which I want the story to be written in, my
Where the
style.
voice where the voice starts matching what's in
Yeah,
your head.
yeah, and
Yeah.
how the narration is,
Mhm.
how it switches points of view, but it still stays in that third person. I think I've really kind of learned that this year. That was my thing in 2023 was I wanted to finish and finalize a book and then start pitching it, but I wanted to make sure that it was in the event that it caught on and I got signed by an agent and the traditional publisher, all the magic happened, right? I wanted to make sure it was what I wanted it to be because if I got number one, there's a chance I could get number two and three. I didn't
They
want
like series. They like
exactly.
series.
I haven't met a lot of people that didn't sign at least a 2 book deal, even with smaller indie publishers or just smaller traditional publishers that they want to try to get a little bit more out of you. So I just said I want to make sure that what I give them is what I can follow up with 2 and 3.
Even if you're publishing yourself, when I say they, I actually meant the readers.
Yeah,
The readers love series. I love
sure.
series. I love getting into it and wallowing in a world. And
Yeah.
um, so you want to be able to have book, 1, 2, and 3 written maybe
Hmm.
before you try to launch into indie,
Yeah.
which is it's a different trick, but it's still
Sure.
the same idea. It's still that same idea. If you want to get it in your head and get it out of your head and into your hands.
Yeah, I can't imagine. And over the course of your lifetime, writing 70 plus novels is just insane. I know you said you can crank out a couple a year, but it's still impressive numbers.
Well, I write 3 to 4 novels a year at this point within a series. If I jump series, I end up making a gap because I have to
Yeah, you got to
restart and
reset the brain.
rethink.
Yeah, a little. Yeah,
But I'll be ticking away on a group of characters for 2 years before I start writing it.
really.
The trick is if I do 3 books a year, I've been writing full time for 11 years and as a hard focus for 20. Suddenly 67 doesn't sound quite so big and horrendous.
Okay, true.
So I had 10 years goofing off, kind of. I sold my first two novels, and then I spent 9 years churning on one of them, 7 years. Um, but then I've had 20 years of working at this pretty consistently. So that builds up a library.
Oh yeah, absolutely does. So
Yeah.
let's talk about some of your adventures. You solo sailed a 1950s sailboat. Where did you go?
Um, I was living in Seattle at the time, and I've always had this. Another one of my always dreams was sailing around the world. And so one day I was just kind of pricing sailboats. I'd look at the wanted ad kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I found this old beater of a wooden catch that really needed to be restored, but it needed so much work that I could afford it. And so I spent about 3 years rebuilding that boat, only to finally realize that neither it nor I were suited for deep sea. But in the process, I learned to sail a 50-foot boat, and I went all over Puget Sound, from Tacoma up into the Canadian Gulf Islands, and spent a couple months on it once, just kicking around the islands. Took a summer off between jobs. Oh, she really taught me how to sail.
That's
And
cool.
the happiest and saddest day of a sailor's life are the day he buys a boat and the day he sells a boat. So every time there's a good wind, I go, oh. And every time I see somebody working on their boat, I go, yes.
We had a ski boat when I was in high school, and we
Mm-hmm.
actually had jets. We had a jet ski before that, and we still had it when we had the boat. But we had the jet ski, and it was my stepdad's, and we went out all the time on the water. And it was a big enough of a jet ski where you could tube and ski behind it. It was powerful enough and big enough that you could do that. But you could only put like one person on there and then one person skiing, so everybody else was back on the beach, right? So he
Mm-hmm.
just said, let's invest in a boat. We go to the lake enough. A boat would put a couple more people on there. We could add a little more fun. You could tube a couple more people, a couple more skiers. You just kind of increase the fun. So he went out and bought, I can't remember what it was, big old 18-foot like boat that had an old Plymouth engine in the back, and you pulled up the cover, and there's this big,
Hmm.
V8 Plymouth engine sitting in there. And he worked on that thing every weekend, whether we went to the
Hmm.
lake or not, every
Yeah.
single weekend. And I just thought, I love the idea of buying a boat. I'll never buy one. You'll never see me with a boat because of all
No.
the work I saw my stepdad put into just keeping that thing running.
Yeah.
There'd be weekends he'd work on it for hours, and we wouldn't even go to the lake. He was just doing work, and I thought, oh my, I can't imagine a sailboat.
It was 3 years of stupidity and wonder. And then, of course, like an idiot, I did the math and I figured out how much it would have cost me to rent a sailboat for the number of hours I actually sailed the sailboat. Never do the math. It's really depressing.
I'm sure. I'm sure it's one of those kick yourself in the pants kind of things.
Oh, I could have rented one for a quarter of the cost for
That's
all that sailing.
but was it worth it? Was it worth what you
Absolutely.
got to go see and do and the
Absolutely.
breakaway? I mean,
Yeah.
it had to have been.
Yeah. I can step onto any sailboat and be, yeah, okay, I got it. Let's go. Except a racer. A racer is a different class, and I've only been on a couple of those.
Oh yeah, I'm sure
But
that's a whole nother monster.
yeah,
So you didn't just sail, you've also bicycled around the world. Tell me a little bit more about that. First, what was the decision making process like?
well, I've got to, it's not going to sound true, but it is. I'm not an adventurous person. I'm really not. I just seem to keep doing these things that end up in my past of like, oh my God, I did that. Um, the bicycle was actually the only choice I had left. I got I was part owner of a small business, high end consulting computer.com before there were dot coms. Discovered my business partner had a different definition of the word integrity. She hung me out to dry, so I lost the business. I lost the career because we burned a lot of bridges going down, um, which meant I couldn't keep the house that I'd been remodeling for 7 years for a family I never had time to find because I was a workaholic.
Mm.
And it finally got to the point where the only thing that made sense was selling everything, getting on a bicycle and going around the world. It was like the only option my head could deal with. And I'd been riding a lot, group rides with buddies or bike clubs in the Northwest. And so I got on a bike and I went. And the real gift wasn't all the great places I got to see. I went through 15 different countries in 18 months. The real or the people who were incredible, it was the time. Because the moment I kick the pedal high, I'm alone. And so you're stuck with yourself. And I got to I call it my midlife crisis on wheels. I just peaked early. So at 35, I got to think about every decision I'd made for 35 years and every decision I didn't want to make for the next 35. And I got to think about hour after hour after hour after hour, pedaling through, Japan and the outback and southern India and Israel and up through Eastern Europe. So, yeah, it was a midlife crisis that it got to the point where it's the only option I had.
Okay, but that's still very interesting. A lot of people do backpacking and stuff like that, and
Mm-hmm.
but I mean, bicycling is very interesting, and I'm sure. What was the most rewarding part about that?
The most rewarding part after the fact has been I now have a really clear idea of who I am and what I want and what I'm willing to put up with and what I'm not willing to put up with. Um, that was a huge, huge gift. And I'd say from the ride itself, it was this one guy I met in Indonesia. in a terrible little town that had, third world, everything wrong with it, like you'd expect, except worse. And it turned out they'd had a tsunami come through and kill a third of the population 9 months before. And, here I am, a tourist on his bicycle, rolling into this little Indonesian town. And I asked a guy how to pronounce a word because I try to learn each language as I went into the country. We ended up talking for 3 hours because they had learned in 3 minutes you could be gone. So nothing was more important than people. And I said, so how do you make your choices on going forward? And he said, oh, that's easy. Good heart, good thoughts, automatic good action. And man, I do my best to live by that.
I like that.
Isn't that wonderful?
Yeah. Say that again.
Good heart, good thoughts, automatic good action. And he did it just that way. He would touch his heart, his forehead, and slice his hand forward.
Man, that's awesome. I love
Yep.
that. I love that. That's really good to go by. Um, let's talk about your writing. Now, you've done a lot of crazy stuff, from solo sales to bicycling around the world to jumping out of airplanes after you flew them, and so you got a lot. You got a lot going on. You're a project manager. You've designed and built houses, and now, um, 70 plus novels. You've read 50 of them. You've done the audio narration of. Um, your romantic
Not
through.
quite.
Not quite.
I've done narration of about 25
Okay.
novels and about 25 short stories
Okay.
because I also have all those short stories.
Okay. Cool. Your military romantic thrillers are described like Robert Ludlum and Nora Roberts had a book baby. It's a pretty big endorsement. I mean,
Yeah,
it's a pretty big endorsement. Let's talk about that. You often don't see, um, when you're talking about military thrillers, you often don't see so much of a romantic side. Sometimes you'll see a connection to a character in the book as a love interest and some flirting, and just to give it a different kind of spin. But you don't often see a full military romantic, kind of novel. What makes yours so unique in that aspect? How do you blend the two?
there are two different things. I mean, it is a subgenre of romance. Military romantic suspense is it's an actual subgenre. So there are a lot of people writing in it, but I think a lot of them, the ones that hit the mark for me, aren't very common.
Mm.
And I think there are two things behind it. The big one is it's in the name itself. It's like if you can peel out any one of those three words and the story still survives, then it's a failure as a military romantic suspense. If you can peel out the military, then you've really got a romantic suspense.
Mhm.
Or if you can peel out the suspense, then you've got a romance with military characters. But if you have a true military romantic suspense that has all three of those legs, and if you pull out the suspense, the story collapses, or you pull out the romance, the story collapses, then you're sitting in that sweet spot
Mm.
where the emotions are being driven by the suspense and by falling in love, where the military crisis is being driven by and solved because there was a romance at the right moment to solve that crisis. So I really look for all those pieces to wind together. And now I write geopolitical techno thrillers. If you peel out the geopolitics, my stories fall apart. If you peel out the thriller or the action adventure aspects or the technology, they fall apart. I try to wind those elements together. And I think that's true of any genre that has more than one word in it. Contemporary, okay, contemporary romance is very simple because nothing happens. It's a couple who fall in love. And I think it's probably the hardest one of all to write because nothing happens
Well, yeah.
in
How do you
in in
do?
all a good way.
Yeah. How do you do different POVs? How do you do different things throughout the book that kind of upset the balance of things and keep the
Exactly.
reader engaged. Like even in like even the most basic of like fiction books, there's still those little nuances along the way that kind of like, oh, fork in the road here, or oh,
Yeah.
little issue here. So I mean, you almost have to have them in order for something to kind of keep going and survive. But I think the way you described um, the genre, of military and romance, and in the geopolitical, like if one thing is taken out of it, does it fail or not? Is
Right.
probably the best way I've ever heard it described, because no matter what you're trying to write, there's always there's multiple lines of kind of like dialogue and story genre within it. And if you pull it out, what does it
Political
do?
thriller,
Yeah.
any of those.
There's always military stuff with political thrillers
Yeah.
and vice versa. And there's always technology, it seems like, to some degree. If you take that out, what happens to the story?
Right.
I think that's probably the
And
best way of
and
phrasing
because
it.
I'm writing a techno thriller, I'm writing about the investigation of military plane crashes now. So it's very technology oriented. And of course, then there's the other challenge as a writer of what are the 3 words I put in to make you see the 4 hours of research I did.
Right. I think I do a lot of research because I try to be as accurate as possible when I'm writing certain things. But then there's to a degree where it's like, okay, I wrote 3 words about that. Yeah,
Yeah.
I did all this research to make sure I got the acronym correct or something like that. And you kind of just wonder, like, how important was that really?
And I have this argument all the time with various people. And for me, I think that's what it comes down to is what's my brand and my voice as an author is for me, it's very important because not only do I want those who understand that a clock doesn't have a safety to not get upset because I put a safety on it, but I want to make you make it real enough that you're willing to suspend the disbelief. And one of the highest pieces of praise I ever got was for that very first military romantic suspense book. I was writing about the Night Stalkers. It would be 15 years before I got up in a helicopter. And I actually just got my first helicopter lesson last week, ever. The first time I actually held the controls. I've written 40 books about helicopters. So it's been pure research.
Mm-hmm.
But I had an actual night guy who tried to get into the Night Stalkers, which is just you probably know, but they're the most elite helicopter pilots on the planet.
Mm-hmm.
And he said he read the book, and the compliment he sent back was, "Yeah, I tried to get in. You got it right."
Ooh.
And he said that I was close enough that he could go into the story and dream that he had actually made it.
That's good. That's an endorsement.
Yeah.
That's as close to a Night Stalker's endorsement as you're probably going to get.
No, I actually have a couple Night Stalkers fans who
Right
talk
on.
to me through a friend. So I have
Okay.
no idea who they are,
Sure.
but I have a super fan who is a friend of Night Stalker pilots. And so she feeds them my books on occasion, and every now and then she'll feed a question.
Okay.
And I get these looped back answers when they come in from overseas.
Okay. Well, hey, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, Jesus,
Yeah.
it's as close as a direct connection as you're probably going to get. Those guys probably keep it pretty, you know, close knit and
Oh, yeah.
close to the chest. They probably don't reveal a lot, but that's cool. That's really awesome because some of those programs are really hard to get into, and they're hard for a reason.
And okay, piece of backstory. The way I got into all this was I tried to write a military commander in a science fiction novel. I started in science fiction, and he got laughed out of the room by all the guys because he was just this useless wimp. He really was. But no, he's the commanding general. No, he ain't. So I started reading military memoir. I figured that was the way to find out about these people. And so I started reading about the guys who choose it as career. So I was reading, Chuck Pfaffer, Warrior Spirit, and all. I just went out and found as many as I could, and I was reading those, and it's like these guys are amazing. They're choosing for reasons that none of us would suspect. None of us who haven't served, civilians, would suspect. They're choosing to serve as a career, and the reason they make those choices was just fascinating. So I wanted to honor that as well as I could. And so I was looking for a way to get under that, to kind of have enough story that I could play that in. So I'm not saying, here's what they're doing.
Right.
And that's when I stumbled on the Night Stalker application. Being a guy, I had to read it and see if I would have qualified back in the day. Hell no. Uh, Not even close. But the second line in 2006 on the application was women may not apply. And there was my idea. And it's all centered around, all my novels are female centric first. And it was the woman who's so good they couldn't keep her out. And that just set me up for writing all of the military romance, but from that female point of view, but bringing in that male honor. So getting this real depth of character.
So, do you have a pretty heavy female audience, or is it kind of 50-50?
It was, it's really hard to get a read,
Mm-hmm.
but even when I was writing the straight military romantic suspense, I was probably running about 15% male, which is very high in the romance genre, or it
Yeah.
was 10, 15 years ago. Um, Most of them crossed over to the thrillers, though. So I think I'm up to probably 30% male, but that's because I brought so many of the female readers over with me, because I bring that character richness, that character depth. A lot of thrillers, the character's real superficial and he's just going through the action.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, my style, my voice, again, it's different for every author, but I want to plunge into that character because that's what I'm fascinated by, because of that romance researching military background. It all plays in to make our own unique voice.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Um, so what's kind of next? You're cranking out all these books a year. What's in store for 2023? Let's do that first.
Okay, for 2023, I've got a couple more of my Miranda Chase thrillers because I can't stop writing her. I just love Miranda. She's an autistic air crash investigator. She's a genius about air crashes and hopeless about everything else. So her team is, I tend to think of them as disassociated parts of her brain. This person's good with people. This one's good with enforcement, being the muscle. This one's, and she's good at planes, or planes. And so she's just so much fun to write. I have an old thriller series that I started years ago and never had time to go back to, that I'm hoping to get one book out this year. It's my Dead Chef thriller series, which is their TV chefs are dying on air, and why. And they're foodie thrillers. They're just romp.
Yeah, I kind
It's
of
just a
saw.
romp.
I'm looking at it on Amazon, and I'm like, what is this?
Yeah, it's just a romp. They're great fun.
It looks fun.
And then the crazy, really crazy thing I did was I've written 120 short stories. Almost all of them are romance. I know how to write a romance story. I know the structure. I know the feel. I know how it flows. Thriller short story is tough because you're trying to get tension and character and a
Yeah.
problem and a solution all crammed into a short story.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought about what's the best way to learn about how to write thriller short stories. And that's when I realized there were no thriller magazines to subscribe to. their anthologies that are pure thriller are very rare too.
Mm-hmm.
And I sort of went, no, this ain't right. I love short fiction. I grew up on Arthur C. Clarke and Isaac Asimov. And so I have founded a thriller magazine. I got 30 authors to go in with me for the first year. We kickstarted it last month. Issue 1 came out last week. And it's a themed magazine. So the first one was Honor, oddly enough for me,
Mm-hmm.
and then Unlikely Partners. And I, it was so much fun to edit these authors because I got some spectacular people coming in. David Bruns, Brendan Dubois. I got some powerhouse writers submitting stories, and I got to go, okay, but I don't think you nailed the ending of this. And I got to really take apart the structure of almost 50 different stories and help the authors see how to, if they could take them to the next level. It was so much fun.
Yeah,
It
that's
was
very
so much
cool that you
fun.
started that. I think it's really cool that you did that, and obviously you're going to be doing more of that in 2023 and 2024. But what else is on the docket?
I'm trying to cross things off the docket.
Aren't we all?
So I'm hoping to focus. I mean, I have a web store. I'm going to be doing more audio. Um, I'm starting a readers club, an online readers club, where they get to sit there and ask me questions for the fun of it.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to be doing more fan outreach, but I'm really trying to focus on writing novels and doing the magazine once a year because it's a has a 4 month submission window. Then we go to Kickstarter, and then I have 4 issues in the can, and it's just a matter of marketing those 4 issues for the next year.
Yeah.
And the idea is that whole cycle repeats every year. So submissions will open later this year, and then uh, we'll kickstart in February and launch in March for the next year.
Wow. So, before I let you go, where can people go to find out more about the magazine and follow you so they can get in on the book club and interaction with you on social media and all that?
Um, the best place to find me is anything ML Buchman. That's MLBUCHMAN. And that's .com. That's on Facebook. That's on Twitter. I hate social media, but I do keep some eye on it. Um, that'll give you the link out to thrillridemag.com, but MLBUCHMAN.com. That's the cornerstone of everything. That'll find my online store, what order to read the books in, more about me, how to contact me. It's all there.
Awesome. Well, this was an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for your time.
You
Interesting
bet.
story. Huge endorsements for your Miranda Chase series, and according to the Amazon reviews, they look incredibly intriguing, and a lot of people have loved them. And this was great, man. Thank you so much for coming on.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.